This podcast is sponsored by nobody.
Hey dudes, this is Bonnie Hayes. I sang Girls Like Me on the original Valley Girl soundtrack. You're listening to Tommy Throwback Kovac on Splat from the Past. He fucking rocks.
Hey dudes, welcome to Splat from the Past, the only 80s themed horror sci-fi show where things can get totally radical. Now, I am just so fucking excited for today's show because I will be talking to Bruce Woolley. Bruce Woolley is one of the co-writers of Video Killed the Radio Star. He originally wrote it for his group, the Camera Club, in the late 70s, which featured Thomas Dolby on keyboards. And then he gave it to his buddies and co-writers, Trevor Horn and Jeffrey Downs, aka the Buggles, and it became the first music video on MTV in 1981. It's the 40th anniversary as of August 1st. And it'll be my second interview of celebrating the iconic song and video. I had Nina Blackwood on the very first day of summer, and it's going to be a great conversation. And he also produced Grace Jones, including her biggest album, Slave to the Rhythm. He formed the Radio Science Orchestra, very groundbreaking group and / organization that it's become. It's become a real big entity in the world of music and soundtracks and what have you. And it's going to be a great conversation. I am just honored and I am very excited. So yeah, here is my interview with Bruce Woolley. Video killed the radio star. Video killed the radio star.
Hello.
Hey Bruce, welcome to the show, sir. How are you today?
Very well, Tommy, and all the better for hearing from you.
Oh, thank you, sir. I don't hear that very often. Thank you very much.
Not at all.
This is such a great honor. Thank you for taking the time today.
Not at all, and thanks for asking me. I mean, are you hearing me loud and clear? Am I coming through okay?
Oh yeah, you're here. You're coming in just fine.
Great. So, well.
So going back in time, I was reading. You started playing electric guitar while you were at Loughborough Grammar School. What age was this?
Oh, Loughborough Grammar School. Well, I was 16, I guess. I remember having something of an epiphany one day on a school trip. We came back on the bus quite late at night, and two of the boarders, because the school had boarders, which means that they lived at the school.
Right.
But fortunately, I didn't live at the school. They had acoustic guitars, and they played Hey Jude on the way back from this theatrical trip that we'd been to. And it kind of blew my mind a bit, actually. And I thought, well, they're just playing acoustics. And I saw them a few days later, and we went to their what was known as their common room, and they had electric guitars. And that was really a pivotal moment for me. It was almost like opening a kind of portal into another world. You know, I heard these electric guitars for the first time live. I'd never heard one before, and it just sort of my head just shifted really. It's funny you should talk about that. Yeah, it was an unexpected question, and it sort of then led me to. I guess Led Zeppelin, really. And so that my obsession around the age of 16 with a friend of mine, we formed a group. And we were just obsessed with electric guitar. Like a lot of people, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, Led Zeppelin influenced a lot of people, even people whose music ended up not being like Led Zeppelin. They were still a huge influence.
Yes, and the school that we went to, that we attended, was, I was talking to my brother about this, about the the decline of the English language here in the UK, something that we're having to sort of put up with. Now, I'm sure this is all to do with me getting a bit older and thinking, oh, people aren't speaking properly anymore. But actually, we came out of almost out of World War II in that school, because the teachers would have probably all fought in that war, certainly the older ones. I know one of them was in the French Resistance, for example. I mean, how they survived some of that stuff is incredible. But they went on to become teachers in a very, almost a Victorian kind of school. And so it was very strict and very restrictive. And the concept of, say, becoming a professional musician or even a professional artist of any kind was completely out of the question. It just wasn't on the radar. And at that moment when I heard those electric guitars for the first time, I suddenly thought, you know what? Maybe this is a route forward. Maybe this is something I could do. And it never occurred to me at that up to that point that it would be a possibility. And still, obviously, the odds are stacked against anybody wanting to enter the music business today, then, or at any stage of the sort of, if you like, the recording industry, which is probably sort of just over 100 years old now, probably actually older, 120 years old maybe.
Yeah.
So the idea of doing that professionally wasn't on the cards.
I see. So who were your overall musical influence besides Led Zeppelin? Were you into like the Beatles and stuff?
Yes, I was actually, and I have to thank my father, who would come home. He was a jazz musician, and he kind of introduced the Beatles records into the house,
right?
And he appreciated them. He and in fact he probably the generation gap with him and me was forged with Led Zeppelin, who he accused of only playing one chord. And which wasn't really fair, because he used to listen to a lot of blues music himself. And if you listen to Mannish Boy by who played that, that famous blues player, that song has basically a one chord riff going all the way through it. But he really liked chord sequences, and the Beatles was smart, and he understood that, I think. And so he brought their records into the house way before I could afford to buy anything, because I didn't, I had no money. I wasn't able to buy records.
Yeah.
So that was quite thrilling. Hearing the Beatles and hearing them progress in real time was really something, actually. Did you like the Beatles, Tommy?
Oh, I love the Beatles. I think they're the best band that ever lived and will ever live. Their music is touched by God pretty much, because nobody could crank out that many great songs in one album, every album. It's amazing how great they are.
Yeah, well, we're on the same page there then, because I do know people who actually say they don't really like the Beatles, and I sort of think, do I believe you? Are you serious? Surely you must like the Beatles, but there are people that don't like them. And as you say, they're probably the greatest band that ever was and ever will be, because sociologically what they stood for was so huge, wasn't it?
It was. It wasn't just their music, it was their lifestyle, it was, the Western civilization that they touched. It was just a moment in time post-Kennedy assassination that the entire world, was healed by the Beatles.
That's an interesting way of looking at it, yeah.
Yeah.
And they may be not single-handedly, but certainly influential in bringing down the Berlin Wall, bringing down Russian communism to an extent. Mm-hmm. Just with that one song back in the USSR, no, but also revolution, and it was just incredible. And and when I say we watched them in real time, they were developing, weren't they, as artists? They were evolving as humans and as musicians, and pushing the boundaries in the recording studio, and really starting to use the recording studio as a musical instrument.
Exactly.
In its own right.
Exactly. I couldn't have put it better myself with that. That is a really good way of putting it, Bruce. Yeah. you remember the first?
Well,
oh, go ahead.
Sorry, no, carry on.
I was going to ask you. Do you remember the first album you ever bought?
It was probably because I had so little money. It was a thing called Nice Enough to Eat, which was an Island Records sampler. They'd never existed before, and this was when Island Records was sort of just coming to prominence, and Chris Blackwell had set the label up as a kind of progressive label. So it was kind of alternative, for want of a better word. And on this album, which was cost very little compared to sort of about the third of the price of a normal LP, it had sort of something like 15 tracks of different artists, all on the Island label. So you got the opportunity to hear all these different artists, and including, by the way, Court of the Kings and Crimson King by King Crimson, which, when I heard that, I just thought, what on earth is this? Where does this music come from? So perhaps that's not really an album, but so that was an eye-opener. And actually, I'm trying to remember what the first actual proper album that I bought was. It might have been something like Wishbone Ash or something like that, because I was still very heavily into guitars.
Yeah, I like Wishbone Ash.
And they got that twin lead thing. Did they not? I think the Eagles had a good listen to them.
I think so too, yeah. Yeah, Island Records, they had Traffic too. They were pretty experimental. Yes. Yeah.
They did. They also had a guy called Nick Drake, who sadly didn't live very long, but also very influential to this day as a folk artist. And so they had a huge roster, all sorts. Blodwyn Pig, I seem to remember, was one of them. And Free were on the label at the time.
Free.
Yeah, I think Jethro Tull. So all that so-called progressive stuff, I was quite into, but I was also into pop music as well. And I had aspirations, Tommy, to become a jazz rock guitarist. One of the other records that my father brought into the house was a guy called John McLaughlin. And this was before anyone had heard of him.
Right.
And he'd done this sort of strange kind of hybrid jazz, and we're using an electric guitar record, and it was like, that was unlike anything I'd ever heard as well. And he progressed into the Mahavishnu Orchestra, which you may be familiar with, and that whole ethos of being like a brilliant musician. I mean, that doesn't really count for a lot these days, it seems to me, commercially, that is. I mean, jazz has always been on the edge of commercial, does jazz sell? And there have been periods where it has, and has been very popular. And McLaughlin sort of cracked that jazz rock idiom. And I thought, I'd really like to be like him. But unfortunately, I just wasn't good enough. And I did join a jazz rock band locally, and with some very fine musicians. But nobody came to the gigs, It was sort of like... It was a bit sad, really, and I wasn't good enough, and that's what sort of led me to being massively influenced by the Beatles to kind of write pop songs, and
right.
It seemed the logical route. It seemed a logical route. And one day I thought, you know what, I'm never going to be the greatest guitarist. I still love playing the instrument, of course, but I thought maybe I could simplify the whole thing and boil it down to 4 chords, and let's see what we can do with that.
Right. Do you remember the first concert you ever attended?
I do remember that, actually, and it was the Groundhogs, and they were an English blues band, absolutely brilliant, and they were supported incredibly by Canned Heat. And I remember reading the review afterwards that Bob Haidt, the singer, of Gravity, because his trousers kept falling down. But I was a big Canned Heat fan as well. So yeah, that was that was a momentous experience, actually, seeing the Groundhogs live.
Yeah,
Did they make much of an impression in the States? I don't know if they did or not.
Yeah, I don't know either, but Canned Heat certainly did. I like that band.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah, they were pretty huge, weren't they?
Yeah, they were pretty big for a while. So did you study music in college?
No, I didn't actually. No, I kind of wanted to go to art college. I would have liked to have gone to art college and been like Roxy Music, but I ended up doing a course in textile design, which was deadly boring. But again, there it wasn't even university in those days. It was called a polytechnic. I did meet some great musician friends with whom I'm still friends today, and so in a way, it got me into the thing. Even though the course, I was kind of wasting my time studying textile design, but I met some great musicians. And actually, during that time, because I was into the art thing, that still wasn't really making much money, I joined a rock and roll revival band called Jet Pacey and the Plains, playing kind of 50s rock and roll,
right,
which was a lot of fun. And we all dressed up as teddy boys with a sort of slicked back hair and sunglasses, and that was a riot. And of course it paid really well as well, because people wanted to hear that, you know.
Yeah.
They certainly didn't want to hear my original material.
Yeah. How did you come to write Dusty Springfield's Baby Blue?
Well, after college and all of that, I moved down to London, because the only way really to succeed in music in those days was to literally to be physically in London. It's probably very different now,
yeah,
but in those days there was no scene up in Leicester, which is where I was. I sometimes sort of fondly call the Midlands the land that time forgot. And in fact, I'm going up to see my 93-year-old mother tomorrow, who still lives up there.
Oh, good.
And it is still like the 70s. When I go up there, it's still like the 70s. It hasn't really changed. And there's still not much music to speak of up there, but of course it's easier now to communicate with people, and I could be speaking out of turn about the Leicester music scene, but the thing is, you had to move to London. That's the point. And when I moved to London, I met up with Trevor Horn, who you've obviously heard of, and a guy called Jeff Downs, and got a bit of a job playing for Trevor's girlfriend at the time was a lady called Tina Charles, and she was quite a successful singer here in Europe. And I became part of her backing band with Trevor and with Jeff, and we did quite a bit of work together. We went to the Far East and did some touring out there, and that was a lot of fun, and it was great training as well as a guitarist. And Trevor and I had already worked on what is known as the Mecca circuit, which was kind of dance bands in nightclubs up in the Midlands. So we'd had this training in playing. Basically, we earned our living in covers bands. That's how we did it.
Right.
And Tina Charles was a kind of step up, because she was playing her own hits and we were the band. And so I got to know Trevor and Jeff really, really well. And after the tour, we kind of just used to hang out together, I guess. And just the three of us would just jam. And we had this song, which was called Baby Blue. And I remember it taking sort of almost like a year to write. It seemed to be, it probably wasn't, but it was several months. And we nicknamed, when we got together, we called it the Baby Blue Club, because all we did was get together, jam, and then we'd play this song. And every time we got together, it got a little bit more finished. So after several months, we finished it and then recorded a demo. And my manager at the time, by this time I'd got a manager, and I was trying to pursue a solo career. He was called Mike Hurst, and he was in a group called the Springfields, which I remember when I was a child.
Yeah.
And they did some really very good tracks, actually. And the Springfields was Dusty Springfield, Mike Hurst, and another guy. So Mike knew her really well. And I think he just... and the producer and the record company loved it. And so that's how it came about.
Yeah, I like the song. I think it's wonderful, and that opening keyboard riff is infectious.
Yeah, I mean, that's Jeff. He's a brilliant keyboard player.
Yeah.
As you probably know, he's in various incarnations of Yes and Asia and so forth these days. Well, touring, that's when people are touring, of course. I'm hoping that will all come back again.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we had a bit of an interruption there, haven't we, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So speaking of great keyboard players, you've also worked with Thomas Dolby. How did the Camera Club come about?
Well, I was thinking about this today, and thinking about how I'd done a little bit of work in London, and then kind of went into the doldrums a bit. Things. I'd been signed to a publisher, and that publisher went bust, and we never got paid. And I was sort of, and Trevor was in the same boat. We were pretty much penniless, living in squalor, not together, might add, but in separate squalid accommodation, and nothing was happening. And I think I remember seeing we had a program called the Old Grey Whistle Test, which was a kind of a really excellent BBC television music show. And I remember in quick succession seeing a guy called Robert Johnson, not the blues Robert Johnson, but the guitarist, and he got this 3-piece, and he did these kind of like quite up-tempo, almost new wave. I suppose they were new wave tracks. And then I saw the Cars as well. I saw the Cars of Best Friend's Girl, and I thought, God, this is amazing. I thought I could do, I could combine what I've been learning over the years with the songwriting, but there's an attitude going on here. I kind of identified with it. So I was very influenced by the American new wave scene, funnily enough. I mean, the punk thing was happening in London, but it was very raw. It was very, very street, and that didn't quite... I understood it, and we could draw from the energy of it, and I went to some amazing gigs, but I thought, well, that's not really me. But when I saw the American version, if you like, and of course punk probably originated from America with the MC5. I mean, this is a whole subject for a discussion, isn't it? But so the Americans had taken, you guys had taken this and sort of repackaged some of the English energy again, sent it back. And I thought that was what I really, really identified with that. And so I thought, I'm going to form a group. And a guitarist friend of mine from school, actually, he was a year below me. He was a big Mick Ronson fan, and he'd moved down to London. He was in a group called the Vibrators with a guy called Knox. Mm-hmm. And so he and I got together with the drummer from a group called the Motors, who had some success but then split up, a guy called Richard Werner on drums. He was a brilliant drummer. We just started practicing in his basement. He brought his girlfriend in on bass, a girl called Marion Fudger, and then we needed a keyboard player. And I'd met Thomas Dolby through the back pages of the Melody Maker, which is a magazine that we used to get every week that had a small ads column. And so we just hooked up with Thomas, and he came down and started playing, and he'd got himself a Jupiter 4, which was an early Roland polyphonic synthesizer, and I don't know, it just sort of gelled, really. His name, he wasn't called Tom Dolby, by the way, Thomas Dolby. He had a different name in those days.
Yeah.
He was called Thomas Robertson. Yeah. But there was also another guy on the scene called Tom Robinson, who had a hit with one of his tracks. And these guys, before the guy that had a hit had his hit, the two of them got together in a pub and said, look, the first one of us that gets famous, the other one has to change their name. So Tom Robinson, who's still going, does a music show on Radio 6 here in England. He'd had the hit, so Tom Robertson, our Thomas, had to change his name. He came in one day and said, "I've changed my name," and said, we said, "Oh, what is it?" He said, "It's Thomas Dolby." And we actually collapsed with laughter because we thought he was kidding, We thought, "It can't be serious,"
Yeah.
But he was serious, as we subsequently found out.
Yeah.
Still in touch with Thomas. He's good, actually. He's good.
Oh yeah. I mean, he was pretty much like a genius prodigy, right?
Yeah, he definitely. I would definitely say genius. Yeah, definitely. And he came up with some terrific arrangements when he was in the Camera Club, and the band split, and he went his way, etc., etc. The rest is history. But he's very, very skillful,
right?
And he's got a very distinctive voice. I don't mean his singing voice. I'm not talking about his voice. Just musically, he has a very distinctive voice with the way he plays the keyboards, the kind of chords and the kind of shapes that he makes.
Oh yeah.
It's very, very distinctive. And of course, he was a pioneer with things like sampling technology and so forth. And I think he also timed his video "She Blinded Me with Science" on MTV perfectly. I think his whole trajectory was very well thought out.
Oh yeah. Yeah, there's a video on YouTube of him being honored at some award show a couple of years ago, and he performed "She Blinded Me with Science" on the keyboards, and it was just amazing watching him just work all these different keyboards and the sound effects and everything. It was like watching a master class, in front of a million people,
Yeah, he knows what he's doing. Yeah.
Who are the other bands that were playing in the scene at the time when the Camera Club was playing?
Oh. I guess we supported quite a few of them. I mean, XTC was the first tour that we did was with XTC, and we were the opening act. They were great. Who had a big hit with Lucky Number here in England. She was on Stiff Records.
Right.
And there were a lot of bands on CBS. We were signed to CBS that weren't really doing it. So that probably doesn't really count. But I'm just thinking, who were the bands that were playing? I mean, obviously, we had. Sorry, go on, carry on.
Oh, Elvis Costello.
Yes, absolutely, Elvis Costello, and that he was part of the Stiff roster, Stiff Records, mm-hmm. And that they had quite a few people, including Nick Lowe and so forth. We were very influenced, Trevor and I, by Kraftwerk. That, and of course, that was a huge kind of influence, and also I remember hearing the Talking Heads as well. So, I mean, we're talking, again, not about English acts, but the Talking Heads had a massive effect, as well as Devo, of course. Again, another American band. And even, the Residents, these groups seem to be somehow sort of more exotic than the English counterparts. I think a little bit later, after we were disbanding, or even actually while we were still together, the latter stages of the Camera Club, Adam Ant came on the scene, and the new romantic thing was just sort of beginning to take off. I think Trevor said something about Adam Ant. He said you should never be that fashionable. He said, although. because Adam Ant was like, he was talk about, man of the moment.
Yeah.
I mean, everything he did, it was we're going to number one, and he was across all the newspapers, and he really was very, very visible. And maybe he should have paced himself a bit. But on the other hand, this is pop music, where the lifespan of like 2 years. I think that statistic may still hold. I don't know. So it's a peculiar industry in that it's based on the whims of the general public, really, and fashion plays a huge part of it.
It does, especially that genre of music. Just everyone had different colors in their hair, and they were wearing makeup and all of that stuff. Did you see? Did you see Gary Newman in the scene?
Oh yes, I've sort of omitted to mention Gary Newman. Thomas Dolby. When we first saw Gary Newman, Thomas Dolby took a look at him and said, "See that Gary Newman there? You see him?" He said, "That's me." He said, "That's me." So
trying to emulate him.
So there was a certain competitive quality there, But again, Gary Newman was very influential. He'd made that album, the Our Friends Electric album, and it had all just been a demo. The whole thing was a demo, which they just rattled off, apparently. When they came to try and reproduce it, they couldn't get anywhere near it. So they basically released the demo, which you may be familiar, Tommy. Have you spent time in a recording studio making songs? Is that something you've done?
The closest I've ever come, my father had a band when I was a kid, and I used to go watch them rehearse, and they would record their stuff, of course, but just on a cheap, recorder or something, a boombox recorder. That's the closest I've ever gotten to see music being recorded.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So your father was in a band. That's interesting. And what kind of music did he play, if you don't mind me asking?
Oh no, you could ask. Just hard rock,
Okay.
Blue collar rock and roll, pretty much. Right.
So you were brought up on rock music, then, basically. Yeah.
Rock and
from
pop.
The sound of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, that's interesting. Yes. Well, our fathers do influence us, and I'm still trying to remember the name of that blues guy that did I'm a man, mannish boy. It'll come to me in a second.
That's Muddy Waters. I believe it's Muddy Waters.
Yes, Muddy Waters. Thank you. Yes, you're absolutely right. Yeah. So those guys laid down very much the foundations, didn't they, of rock music? I think with the blues.
A lot of guys did, yeah. Look at all the lawsuits that Led Zeppelin has because they're taking their riffs,
What amazes me is how long that took to come to fruition, that lawsuit. Willie Dixon's son, he'd never heard it or something, and then he heard it about like 5 years ago. How could you not hear a whole lot of love? That's extraordinary, isn't it? But there you go.
Yeah, I have no idea. So the first album, English Garden, I think is a criminally underrated masterpiece. I love it.
Oh, come on, steady on.
I do. It's great. It's a great album. Was it fun recording?
Yes, actually, it was. It was fun recording because we'd done a few gigs. We had a drummer, a very speedy drummer called Rod Johnson, and we sort of bass players were coming and going slightly, but we ended up working with a guy called Matthew Seligman, who went on to work with Thomas later. Matthew sadly died last year of COVID, actually. It's very tragic. Yeah, I know. But he was a brilliant bass player. He worked with the Soft Boys, and as I said, subsequently did a lot of work with Thomas. And I seem to remember us just recording the songs we did the album in about 2 weeks. It was really fast because the unlike today, where it will take us 2 weeks to record the bass drum because you've got so many different options. In those days, you went into a studio and you basically did a bunch of takes, and recorded most of the instruments simultaneously as well. We'd do overdubs afterwards.
Right.
And I found, as a singer, I was very, very quick. I'm sorry, blowing my own trumpet slightly, but I would tend to lay down the vocals pretty quickly. So most of those vocals were sort of maybe second, third, fourth, fifth take, if that. I found my pitching to be reasonably accurate. I can say that, so there was no need for auto-tune. Not that it existed in those days, of course. But I think the album was recorded in the spirit of the times, i.e. there was a bit of that DIY, do-it-yourself ethos going on, because what punk did was just shake up the whole music industry in England, particularly. It just shook it up, and it just injected this new energy into the scene, and I think we definitely tapped into that. And I can listen back to the tracks, everything. It's very energetic, of course. It's all full on. It's I don't think there are any ballads or anything. It's all pretty much a thrash, a new wave thrash, and that aspect of it, yes, it was fun, definitely. But of course, it was raw and it was underproduced, and at the time, I remember thinking afterwards, wish we could have done a bit more with the production, but it was all done in a bit of a rush. The record label had seen us live, and the head of the CBS went over to my manager and said, "We've got to have the album. We need it now." So there was this pressure all of a sudden for us to record, and we did it, and we all enjoyed that recording process. And by the way, thank you for your kind words on this album. For the last few years, I've been negotiating with CBS Records, now Sony.
Yeah.
And I think I can safely announce that we will be re-releasing the entire thing for the digital world.
All right, that's awesome.
It's been a real struggle, I can tell you. But I think we're there. We signed the contract, I think, 10 days ago. So technically, they've got to release it now. But I won't I'll believe it when I see it,
Right. There's a lot of
so that hopefully we'll reach a new audience with that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of great...
and some other tracks. Uh-huh. Yeah, other tracks that didn't get released as well. Hoping to put together a bit of a package on that one.
Nice. Oh, I can't wait. Yeah, I mean, you guys were in good hands. You had Mike Hurst producing, who was coming off of Manfred Mann and Cat Stevens, and each song has like an influence at the time. Like "Clean Clean" reminds me of a '60s pop song, and you got "Class" as kind of early punk. I just it's got a great eclectic sound. And the version you guys recorded, the Video Killed the Radio Star, kind of reminds me of the pub rock scene that was going on at the time, like with Elvis Costello and Nick Lowe and Dave Edmunds.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, I guess that's what we were aiming more for, that kind of straight ahead approach, and this is where I guess the dilemma of the production thing came in. I think we were striving for something with our version of the song, which we never really achieved, in my opinion. And it wasn't until some years later, and I went over to Ireland to see Trevor Horn, who at the time was a tax exile, and he was having to live in Ireland. I mean, literally, because he was so rich, he'd have to pay it all in tax. So I went over to spend a few days with him, and he said, "Listen, have you heard this?" And he played me a version of Video Killed Radio Star by the presidents of the United States of America.
Yeah.
And we just both kind of looked at each other and we thought, you know what, that's really good. They kind of almost got the kind of definitive version of what we were fighting. It was certainly what the Camera Club would have liked to have done, I think, or something along those lines. And in fact, funnily enough, after they released that song, because the song hadn't really done any business for a few years, it had fallen completely out of fashion. They somehow gave it a kickstart again, and the song starting to get back into the consciousness again. So they did us a favour, I think, by doing that cover.
Yeah, I remember I went to go see the movie The Wedding Singer, and I heard that version. I was like,
Hmm.
that's a pretty good version. I mean, I prefer the Buggles
Yeah,
version, but it's a good version overall. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. Well, the Buggles version, I mean, you use the word masterpiece, it's very nice, but the Buggles version is a kind of masterpiece, really. It's a kind of like a Swiss watch with with multiple components, all of which are beautifully built and engineered. And that blueprint came out of a session, funnily enough, which was originally financed by Tina Charles.
hmm
Again, going back to her, she gave us the money to make that demo, which provided the blueprint for Jeff and Trevor to then carry on
yeah,
and turn it into a proper record. So it had a lot of research on it, that track, that version, and again we were playing it live. While the Buggles were recording their version, we were doing our version live, and the song was changing from gig to gig, and so we were adding to it and developing it and researching it, as I say, and that's so the song. The final version, the Buggles version, was a result of all of that information and stuff that we kind of all the ideas that we had were all kind of put into that version.
yeah. So
Yes, peculiar. Yeah.
so how did the inspiration for the song come about?
Well, two things really. One is a song called "Lonely Boy" by Andrew Gold, which was a big hit over here, and it had in fact, it was on the radio today. What a coincidence! And I listened to it, and it was just so beautifully put together, and it had this chord sequence, which is a sort of ascending chord sequence, which I kind of I won't say I copied it because I didn't, but I was definitely influenced by that. So these chords are going up, and someone observed that the song doesn't hit the tonic of the tune until the very chorus. So I didn't know that, by the way. But so what happens is these chords move in a certain way, and and they're in the key of the song, but you haven't heard the chord that of that key, if you see what I mean. So you're sensing the key of the song while these chords are progressing, and then you only get the actual root note of the key of the song, the tonic, on the top of the chorus, and that's partly what gives it its impact. I never realised any of that, by the way. That's music theory that somebody else figured out. And so that's where the music was coming from. It was very much like an ABBA song as well. Again, ABBA were a massive influence on me, and Trevor loved ABBA records. We talked about them, we'd play them and listen to them, analyse them, because they were, again, so well researched, so well arranged. And then, but the lyrics just came from a kind of a space that we shared, a common portal, if you like, mental portal. I do believe when you're writing with somebody, there are a lot of frequencies and inspirations that you can't fathom. You don't know what's going on. It's happening on a like, if you like, an unassigned frequency. So Trevor and I had been reading this book, which, oddly enough, by J.G. Ballard, which was about music becoming unfashionable to listen to. So the audio spectrum was a bit passé, and the only way to absorb music would be to feel it through these new systems. And so we had this concept of the technology coming along, which basically made previous technology redundant. So, I mean, a good example is like, let's say the blacksmith in the village, shoeing a horse, or he's hitting some metal, and suddenly a Model T Ford motor car comes around the corner.
Right.
He thinks, well, the writing's on the wall for the blacksmith.
Yeah.
But of course, the trick ultimately is to stay in the travel business. But so this song was about a technology coming along previous norms, and So, I mean, video never did kill the radio star. Far from it. If anything, it propelled the business, gave it another, incredible injection of activity and finance and so on and so forth. But so it's a kind of it's an analogy, basically. So these lyrics all came quite abstractly, quite quickly. Trevor's a very fast lyricist. He doesn't like to dwell on a lyric, whereas I'll take months over it, literally. But it sort of comes out in a flash with him. It's very spontaneous, and we were writing the verses, and we had this sort of story. I heard you on the wireless, etc. It was a sort of nostalgic thing based on the fact when we were young, we would listen to the radio secretly, so our parents couldn't hear it. And we had a pop radio station called Radio Luxembourg, which was the only place you could hear. This is sort of before the Pirates, actually. It's the only place you could hear pop music at night, or even on the BBC. It was very staid. So it's that concept of listening to the radio and hearing something you're perhaps not really supposed to be listening to. But when we got to the chorus and Trevor said, "Video killed the radio star," and I literally saw a light bulb flash on top of his head. It was like an hallucination.
Yeah.
Like a flash,
Yeah.
Extraordinary.
I can imagine. Yeah.
There you go. The J.G. Ballard, he gets the credit. He gets the credit for the inspiration for the lyric.
Wow. Yeah, that guitar riff in the middle of the song reminds me of Asia's Heat of the Moment. Was that a coincidence, you think?
Tell me that again. The guitar riff reminds you of what?
Of Asia's Heat of the Moment.
Oh, I see. Well, I mean, the Heat of the Moment obviously came later.
Yeah.
So we might say that we influenced Asia's Heat of the Moment, I think.
Yeah.
I think that might be that's probably the right way round.
I know. I've argued with some people on the internet over that. Are you amazed at how the song has had such longevity and it's become, the iconic music video that it was the first video played on MTV?
Yes, so it was, and they just celebrated their 40th anniversary, didn't they, the other day?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, I am amazed, Tommy. I have to say, I'm totally amazed. I mean, if you told me when we wrote that song, oh, this is going to be around in 40 years' time or whatever, I would have said, nah, come on, get real. But there must be some. I think one of the reasons it sticks around. One, it's a bit like a jingle, so it gets. You've only got to hear it once, and you can just sing it straight back. It is like a kind of science fiction jingle, really. I think the words video, I'm told, and radio are the same in many, many languages. They don't necessarily have translations for those words.
Right.
And of course, video. Oddly enough, video doesn't really exist anymore because we were talking about videotape. But now people still use the word video. You can do a video on your phone, can't you? So those words that's could be just a huge coincidence that the word video has remained in common parlance and actually means something completely different to what it was originally describing. So yeah, there could be lots of reasons why it's still around. Also, it's abstract. I mean, just going back to the Beatles again, their lyrics were particularly towards the end of their career were extremely abstract, weren't they?
Mm-hmm.
So, unlike Bowie, sorry to comparing myself to Beatles and Bowie, I wouldn't presume, but there's something about Is There Life on Mars? Or, Hey Jude even. I mean, those songs, what do they really mean? And they mean what they mean to the listener. I think that's part of it. There's something about track lyrics that have a timeless quality to them as well. Again, we couldn't have contrived any of this. The whole thing is just an accident, basically.
I know.
So it's like you can't really take any you can't take credit for it. But that you asked the question, and I guess I'm just thinking aloud.
Yeah, I just talked to Nina Blackwood, who introduced the video on MTV, and
Okay.
her and I, we both can't imagine what would have been the first video had that song not had a video for it. It's just it was fate. It was destiny, in a way.
Yeah.
I forgot to ask you, who shot the album cover for English Garden? Because it's a pretty funny. You got that, you're holding that camera like it's a gun.
Oh, that, yes.
Yeah.
The guy, we did a shoot. CBS Records did a shoot in what is it, like a botanical garden? That's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
In London, which was a bit obvious actually. And I'm standing there with a load of plants, they're real life huge potted plants, and I felt very uncomfortable with that image. The record, there were other images which we had, and the record label basically forced me to use that image, and it gave me a bit of a complex about photographs on record covers from that moment on. And I said to the manager, look, this picture's not very good. We really need a better picture. By then it was too late. It had already been released, etc. But they said, well, look, they're going to put the album out in America, and we found this photographer. And he showed me a picture of a guy holding a mirror in front of his face. Mm-hmm. So all you could see was the body and then the sun reflecting in the mirror. And it was a very striking image. And he said, look, he takes pictures like this. Yeah. The guy's name was Andrew Douglas, who at the time started to become quite a famous photographer, and he worked with his brother, and they became the Douglas brothers, and became very, very well up on the sort of advertising scene, very fashionable, very high-end work, and so on and so forth. But at that time, he was doing jobs for record labels, and we immediately got on, and we did another session at Battersea Power Station. Yeah. And that shot that you talk about, we set up a huge back projection screen. Everyone, I'm sure, is familiar with green screen, and now to some extent a thing called LED volume. But in those days, you would put the screen up behind the subject and project the image from behind, so that the image is in reverse but lights up behind the subject. And we spent 2 days actually working together in that studio with different projections, and that was the image he came with. And thanks, I mean, that's so much my favorite image. And it was, again, really down to him and his girlfriend, who was the assistant on the job, and they just worked so hard to get that picture. So it remains classic, and I for me it's classic, and I'm hoping that for the new re-release, the digital release of English Garden, which may be called English Garden Extended or something like that, that we'll be using that artwork.
Yeah, it's great. You and Jeffrey Downs co-wrote songs for the duo Dollar, Handheld in Black and White, and Mirror Mirror. How did you like collaborating with that group?
Oh, sorry, just a quick correction there, Tommy. It was Jeff actually wasn't involved in those. It was Trevor and I.
Oh, Trevor and you, sorry.
yeah, it's okay. It's okay. I think Teresa Bizarre, the girl singer from Dollar, met Trevor on an aeroplane and coerced him into agreeing to write a song, and Trev came to me and said, look, Dollar, we both quite liked Dollar. They'd had some hits already in England, and they had a sort of an appeal. They were almost like human Thunderbird puppets. I'm not sure if you know what Thunderbirds is. Like they were larger than life, really extraordinary characters, and they fitted perfectly together. They were a real life couple as well for a while. They were in a dance troupe called Guys and Dolls, and so again we worked very, very quickly. We wrote Handheld in Black and White in an afternoon, and then with Mirror Mirror, it was almost like using a little bit of that video formula, the ABBA formula again. And we just sat down at the piano which is behind me now as we're speaking, and just wrote those songs very quickly, again with Trevor using his stream of consciousness lyric writing. And he comes out with the stuff, and then I edit it a bit. So I would say, well, let's change this, let's change that. So I make a good lyric editor, although I don't profess to be a lyricist myself. So that's the way that works.
They were popular.
And to this day,
Go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, they were
it's just to this day, I do enjoy collaborating with lyricists, yes.
Yeah. They were popular in Europe.
Go, Tommy, we got a delay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They were popular in Europe, but they didn't break through over here.
No, I guess not. And I think that happens quite a lot, doesn't it? Though we're still subject to these geographical tastes, if you like. And I can't, looking back, the American scene in the early 80s, I couldn't see a group like Dollar really cutting through. Whereas over here, I guess the English market was very it liked confectionery, if you like, and that's kind of what Dollar were. They were a piece of confectionery, and gimmick records and comedy records, that sort of thing. I know you've had comedy records in the States, but in the 70s particularly and early 80s, the English market was sort of flooded with terrible gimmick music, which really was quite provincial and wouldn't probably travel to Spain, let alone America. So
yeah. How did you come to?
There you go.
How did you come to collaborate with Grace Jones on "Slave to the Rhythm"?
Well, I've been mentioning Trevor a lot in this discussion, but that's because obviously he was there a lot. We spent a lot of time together, and we still spend some time together. So he had a label at the time called ZTT Records, and he had a very successful act called Frankie Goes to Hollywood.
Right.
And Frankie Goes to Hollywood had just had a nice big #1 record, and Trevor was looking for the follow-up, looking for a song for them, and he asked me to write a song for them. So I went to a guy I knew who also worked with Trevor a bit, a guy called Simon Darlow, and we basically came up, although I say I'm not a lyricist, I came up with a title, Slave to the Rhythm of the Chain Gang, which Simon then edited down to Slave to the Rhythm, and we wrote this piece, which we then played to Trevor and said, look, we think Frankie could do this. And apparently Frankie went quite a long way to recording it. But I think in the end, Holly Johnson, who was Frankie Goes to Hollywood's singer, wanted some publishing on the track. And this is one of these things that happens now and then, by which what that boils down to is he wanted a cut of the pizza slice, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
Even though he hadn't written any of the song. And I think he'd agree that this was a conversation along the way. And we just put our foot down and said, well, no, we don't want to give you rights to the song because we wrote it. And I think he then said, well, that's it, then I'm not going to record it. And they'd done some sessions. It got shelved. So there was a bit of... Plus, don't forget, Holly had just written a #1 song. So why would he want to do a cover from a couple of guys he didn't really know?
Yeah.
So I don't blame him. I don't blame him at all. But anyway, to answer your question, Tommy, Chris Blackwell had signed Grace, and she was about to leave the label to go and sign to EMI, Manhattan Records. And the deal was that Chris could make one last track with Grace before she left Ireland to sign and work with Manhattan. And he said to Trevor, why don't you use that song, that title, Slave to the Rhythm? Mm-hmm. Offer it to Grace. And so to cut a long story short, we met Grace in a hotel room in Notting Hill in broad daylight. And I think this is one of the very few times that I've actually seen her in broad daylight. It was something like midday or something, ridiculous for her because she's so nocturnal. She doesn't even go to bed till midday, let alone get up and have a meeting in a hotel room. So I met her in her bedroom with Trevor. It was bizarre. And we played her the song, and she said, I quite like it, you know. And so we went ahead and we met up and we recorded a version of the track. And that's how I met Grace Jones. And incidentally, she and I got on very, 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 very well. The problem, though, Tommy, was that the song that we'd recorded sounded a bit like, I don't know if you're familiar with an artist called Gary Glitter.
Oh, yeah.
But it sounded a bit like a Gary Glitter track. Kind of very white, Teutonic beat, not at all R&B.
Yeah.
And it was Grace Jones's mentor, a guy called Jean-Paul Goude, who's a fashion designer, not Jean-Paul Gaultier, Jean-Paul Goude, and he did all the flat top and all the great artwork and everything. He said the problem with this track is it's too white. He said you can sell a black groove, right, to a white man, but you can't sell a white groove to a black man. And that was a kind of turning point in the project. And we suddenly thought, wow, yeah, he's right. This isn't grooving. It's just not groovy. It's like that English pop thing that we were talking about. It's sort of like the gimmicky sort of stuff that won't translate, it won't travel, it won't communicate. Make this single. And that's when EMI started to get very jittery because they were still waiting for this Grace to finish this one song. And Trevor was going off on one round the world, traveling all over the place, recording version after version after version.
Yeah.
So it started to get a bit hair-raising. In the end, the happy ending is that we finished all 8 versions and more that you've never heard, and put them out all on one album. And it came out on Island Manhattan, or I think it might have been called Manhattan Island Records.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and that's how they got round the legal issue.
Yeah, she seems like a force of nature, is she?
She certainly is. I mean, I will say, you know, I spent the last album that we did together. I spent 20 years working on that one album. I know that sounds absurd, but that's the reality. And ended up perhaps with, I forget how many tracks I got on the album in the end. But working with her, she's an absolute sweetie. I mean, you wouldn't expect it, but she's one of these people who I recognize as a lyricist. So we would spend nights together because that's how she worked. And no matter what I tried to say, please, Grace, could we start at 6 at night? Please, let's start at 8 o'clock tomorrow evening. But we'd never really get going before midnight. So I had to change my whole body clock, everything. I had to change my whole lifestyle. No, really, I really had to put myself out to enable myself to work with her. But when we were in those sort of hours during the night working together, and incidentally, that's exactly what it was, just as a very professional working relationship. She'd be the lyricist and I'd be the musician. It was just great. It was proper yin and yang stuff. And she's really good. She's like really talented. A lot of people don't think she is, but she is. I was listening to a song we did called Victor Should Have Been a Jazz Musician. I found the original demo of that only the other day. I'm trying to restore it from a two-track cassette. I've been able to extract the vocals from that quite successfully. And it just sent shivers down my spine. We re-recorded it later with Nile Rodgers. It never quite had that magic. There's always that thing about the magic of the demo. But Grace is great. She's a true artist.
That's great. So how did you come to form the Radio Science Orchestra?
Oh, my goodness. Well, yeah, said I was in the doldrums a bit when I moved down to London, and it happened again in the early 90s. I was definitely in the doldrums. I was not really enjoying what I was hearing on the radio very much. There seemed to be at a kind of almost a crossroads, and it coincided with me becoming aware of a genre of music called Exotica, which is a kind of post-war easy listening, you might say. And it was an album called Music Out of the Moon in 1947 by a guy called Les Baxter. Samuel Hoffman, who played all the theremin parts in The Day the Earth Stood Still. And I became dimly aware of this instrument and of this kind of music. And it coincided also with a club in London at Madame Jojo's, it was called. Sadly closed down now, but it was a real proper 60s sort of gangster club, with like cabaret and a very exotic atmosphere. And the guys running it called this an evening of exotic easy listening. And it was around the time people were kind of getting into the irony of the irony of easy listening. I suppose it ultimately became summed up by Austin Powers and the kind of soundtracks that they were using. It was so all this music was being rediscovered. Music like John Barry's James Bond music, for example, suddenly became very hip, and Ennio Morricone. It was all right to listen to good, well-crafted orchestral music, and there was this slight tongue-in-cheek thing about the whole scene as well. And I managed to get theremin in the end after a lot of trial and error, and did a gig because I hadn't performed really much since the Camera Club, actually. And I thought, wow, maybe I'm never going to perform again. And I was 40 by now, and I thought I may never play again. And what for me, finding a theremin, working with female musicians as well, a harp player, keyboards, sax, playing some classical repertoire, playing film music in this strange club. For me, it was an absolute lifesaver. And to this day, we're still together as a unit, the Radio Science Orchestra. Although we're very obscure, and you probably won't have heard of us, but it's still. There's something still there that is very valuable to me and very dear to me, because it's a form of expression that I thought I may not be able to do again, but have been able to do since 1993. And everyone's had to stop gigging in the last couple of years, but our last tour was in the moon landing. And we did some covers for the first time. They'd never been performed of these tracks, Music Out of the Moon by Les Baxter. We performed them live. And it was a glorious experience. We played with Kraftwerk at the Jodrell Bank Astronomical Observatory, where they have a festival called Blue Dot. And we ended up performing at the TED Summit in Edinburgh that year. And we didn't know it, but they were basically to be amongst our last gigs to this date, because we haven't played since. So that's sad that the live scene has been so effective. But thank you for asking. And the theremin is something that still leads me to very, very different places I would never have gone had it just been a guy playing guitar and singing. It's a very, again, indefinable, almost mysterious.
Yeah, I mean,
kind of connection.
Yeah, I mean, it's become a huge entity for you. I mean, it was on the soundtrack to the Avengers movie. I mean, it's been, everywhere.
Yeah, and our thereminist, a guy called Charlie Draper, just recently, he's in the Radio Science Orchestra. He recently played the parts to the Marvel Disney Plus thing, what do you call it, Loki. Right. And the theremin is being used in soundtracks in quite an intelligent way, I would say. A nice, very not too gimmicky, because a lot of people perceive it as a sci-fi gimmick, but actually the theremin scene is growing enormously around the world. There are so many people playing it now. There's so much more awareness of it. So there's still a long way to go, I think, with getting the theremin into different types of music in a legitimate fashion.
Yeah.
So that's something I'm very interested in exploring, definitely.
So what are you doing these days now that COVID is winding down?
Well, I've been working on a musical again. Probably the last time I mentioned Trevor Horn. He and I, we've combined some of our more famous songs into a piece of musical theatre, which again, because of COVID, we're not pursuing as a stage production at this point, but we are working on it as a sort of an audio movie, if you like. Mm-hmm. So this is ongoing as we speak, and the last 9 months we have just written something like 10 new songs over Zoom, mm-hmm. which is remarkable. I didn't think it could be done, and it's almost like we're in the same room together. He's still the same. It just comes out. It's just there, and then I spend ages editing it. Yeah. But so that's been good. The time has been usefully spent, and hopefully this piece will come out in the world in my lifetime. Let's put it like that. I hope. And so the writing has been quite good in many ways. The early lockdown, it was almost pleasant, really, because mm-hmm. my life didn't change apart from not doing gigs. As a writer, you tend to spend long hours working, often alone, but in a sort of domestic or in a quiet studio environment. So that part of it, life didn't change too much. But hopefully some of this material will manifest. That's the idea, anyway.
I hope so. Yeah, I mean, you know, we still need music, you know, to make the world go round.
For sure, yeah. And it amazes me at the grand old age of whatever I am now. I think I'm 67. I never thought I'd live this long, but music still it's exciting. It's still. Funnily enough, going back to my college, I just remember I remember expressing mm-hmm. to a tutor. I said, "Look, I'm not enjoying this course. I've got to stick it out." And he just said, "Look," he said, "I get up in the morning and I enjoy my work." And he said, "You want to get up in the morning and look forward to your day and enjoy what you're going to do. And if you can do that, then that's something, isn't it?" So, Tommy, I guess you're in that field. You enjoy what you do, and you know what I mean. And so that's a wonderful gift. I'm not being complacent here. I'm just saying it's something I'm very grateful that I still find it just as it's just like when I was starting. Really, in other words, it hasn't lost its appeal for me. Music hasn't lost its appeal, as you say. It makes the world go round.
It sure does. One last thing I want to ask you, Bruce. Do you get good royalties from Video Killed the Radio Star?
Ask my accountant.
Yeah,
or better still ask my wife. And those things can vary. That was probably one of the things that we never foresaw was the long tail.
Yeah.
Which is where, that's something we hadn't anticipated, and that again, I'm grateful for that. But it goes in and out. It fluctuates. It has its cycle, but it's still there.
Yeah.
And of course, I did write lots. By the way, Tommy, I have written loads of other songs.
I know.
I won't start listing them now, but that's the one of the downsides of having a song that's so famous is that nobody knows about anything else you've done. You just have to live with it.
I know, because I've talked to lots of musicians and songwriters, and they tell me that, there's periods, where the royalties stop and then they come back, and I think to myself, it's got to be really strange now because there's no more record sales and everyone's downloading, and all the downloading companies are keeping all the money.
Yes, that's the reality. I mean, that's no laughing matter. I mean, there are probably two ways, apart from doing gigs now, that someone, let's say someone in my position, could augment their income. I think one is a live stream, and a live stream by which I mean ticketed. And this is something we're working on with the Radio Science Orchestra, and that will all be about perception and reach, and how many people can you reach to sell a ticket to. But the good thing of that, of course, is you can do an event, put on an event, and it can be watched internationally. And you can theoretically, you can sell a lot of tickets. Now, this is something that's born out of COVID, I think. It was always there, but it's definitely a developing business model, and we've seen with people like Billie Eilish and so forth, and absolutely turning a profit with those events. The other one, of course, which is the so-called NFT, remains to be seen how realistic that is. NFT stands for non-fungible token, which is digital art, and a lot of musicians are now looking at this as a way of creating an entirely new business model, where you sell something really doesn't really even exist. But it's for the collector, it's for the enthusiast, it's for the fan, and so on and so forth. And so I think that needs to be examined a little bit more carefully. The NFT market, the digital art market, and I think it's quite a valid pursuit, actually. So I'll let you know about that one.
Okay. Well, Bruce, I want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. This was really great. I feel like I just got a very insightful music lesson today.
Oh, thank you, Tommy. And listen, it's been a great pleasure to talk to you. And you certainly challenged me with some of your questions. And it's always nice to be put on the spot. So I do appreciate that. Thanks for tuning in.
My pleasure, sir. You have yourself a great day, and please stay safe.
Okay.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Okay, and you. Thanks, Tommy.
Absolutely.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Well, there you have it. Bruce Woolley. Ain't he a cool dude? Very nice man. God, he is a walking encyclopedia of music. It was such an honor to talk to him today. Well, until next time, this is Tommy Throwback Kovac saying, there's no shame in living in the past, because the present sucks. Later, dudes. Video killed the radio star. Video killed the radio star.